The silence inside a military auditorium is distinct, it is heavy, disciplined, and smells faintly of floor wax and suppressed anxiety. I sat there, trying to make myself small in the uncomfortable folding chair when Senior Drill Instructor Voss came stomping down the very important person aisle. Voss, a legend in the training cadre with a reputation for eating recruits alive, was a man made of granite and scar tissue. But when he stopped directly in front of my seat, that stone face cracked. His eyes went wide, scanning my face with a confusion that bordered on panic, before he leaned in. His voice was a rough whisper that cut through the ambient chatter. "No way. Overwatch?" Beside me, my father, Frank, a retired sergeant major who believed civilians were a lower species, let out a nervous, dismissive chuckle. He waved a hand at me like I was a nuisance fly buzzing around a wedding cake. "She's just a civilian, Sergeant. Ignore her." But Voss didn't look at him. He ignored the rank on my father's lapel, ignored the protocol, and did the impossible. He snapped his heels together, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden quiet, and locked his eyes on mine with absolute deference. My father had spent his entire life believing that rank was the only currency that mattered in this world. He didn't realize that in the deep dark where I operated, rank means absolutely nothing. Only the mission does. To understand why that single salute shattered my father's world, you have to understand how the day began, in the blistering heat of the base parking lot. Frank was practically vibrating with pride, fawning over my brother, Caleb, the family's golden child who was about to graduate basic training. Caleb looked the part, jaw squared, uniform pressed, and Frank was beaming like he'd built the boy himself. I was standing a few feet away, checking a notification on my phone. To anyone watching, I looked like a bored, millennial doom-scrolling social media. In reality, I was logging into a triple encrypted secure channel, monitoring the biometric feeds of a ghost team operating in a hostile time zone 6,000 miles away. "Put the damn phone away, Maya," Frank snapped, his voice carrying that command tone he never left at the office. "Try to be present for once." I didn't argue. I just slid the phone into my pocket, my thumb lingering on the screen as the heart rate monitor on the feed spiked. Just then, an old friend of Frank's walked by. Frank grabbed Caleb by the shoulder, showing him off like a prize steer, then gestured vaguely in my direction with a look of mild embarrassment. "And this is Maya," he said, his tone shifting from pride to polite apology. "She does tech support for a logistics company. Boring stuff, but it pays the bills. We kept her out of the service, thankfully. Well, Caleb is the one carrying the torch." I felt that familiar twist in my gut. Not anger, but a cold, hollow resignation. Tech support. That was the lie I told to keep them safe, but Frank had turned it into a weapon to belittle me. He looked at me with pity, seeing a fragile girl who fixed printers and reset passwords. He had no idea that the logistics I was managing involved a Tier 1 high-value target, extraction that was currently going sideways in an alleyway he couldn't find on a map. I created a mental partition, box 1, secure and lock, and forced a smile. He thought I was weak, but he was about to learn that strength isn't always worn on a sleeve. To my father, the military wasn't just a profession, it was a priesthood, a sacred order where only the chosen few were allowed to interpret the scripture. Because I hadn't enlisted, because I hadn't sworn the oath in a public ceremony with a flag in the background, he viewed me as a perpetual child who needed the world translated into simple, bite-sized pieces. We were standing near the parade deck, watching the graduates assemble in their dress blues, when he leaned in with that insufferable teaching tone. "You hear that rhythm, Maya? That's called cadence. It's how they stay in sync during the march." He pointed to a ribbon on a passing officer's chest, his finger stabbing the air. "And that one there, that means he served overseas. You have to earn that with blood and sweat, not just by showing up." I nodded, keeping my face perfectly neutral, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I endured it because I had to, because the safety of my cover story depended on me being exactly who he thought I was. To him and to the rest of the family, I was a data analyst for a mid-tier supply chain firm, a woman whose biggest daily crisis was a missing shipment of ball bearings or a frozen spreadsheet. It was boring, it was safe, and in Frank's eyes, it was utterly unpatriotic. He looked at me and saw a civilian failure who chose comfort over duty. never realizing that my boring desk job was the only reason some of those men on the parade field were still breathing. The irony was suffocating because less than 48 hours ago, I hadn't been standing in a parking lot, listening to a lecture on basic marching drills. I had been sitting in a windowless, climate-controlled skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, buried 3 floors beneath a nondescript building in Virginia. The room hummed with the aggressive silence of $1 billion worth of server power, the air smelling of ozone and stale coffee. I wasn't Maya the analyst there. I was the senior ISR tactical controller for JSOC, responsible for the eyes and ears of the most elite operators on the planet. I sat at the center of the command floor, a headset pressing against my ear, flanked by 2 one-star generals who weren't giving me orders. They were waiting for mine. On the screens in front of me, a grainy, monochrome thermal feed showed a squad of operators moving through a dense urban cluster in a hostile region. Task Force Black, this is Overwatch, I said, my voice steady, stripped of any emotion that might cloud the channel. Hold position at Sector 4. I am reading a thermal bloom in the structure directly north of your vector. Multiple heat signatures, armed and waiting. On the ground, thousands of miles away, the squad leader paused. That squad leader was Sergeant Voss, the man currently terrifying recruits on the parade deck, though at the time he was just a voice in the dark, breathing hard into his mic. He didn't know my name, my rank, or my face, but he knew that when Overwatch spoke, it was the voice of God preventing him from walking into a kill box. I guided them through the blind spot, my fingers flying across the keyboard to adjust the drone's aperture, analyzing the threats before they could even chamber around. Overwatch to lead. Shift vector 2 degrees east. You have a clear path, I instructed, watching as the heat signatures on my screen scrambled. In confusion, outmaneuvered by a woman sitting in an office chair halfway across the world. When the extraction was complete, and the birds were in the air, the general beside me had simply tapped my desk, a silent acknowledgement of a catastrophe averted. I had felt a rush of adrenaline then that my father couldn't comprehend. A secret, potent power that made his lectures on cadence feel like someone explaining the alphabet to a poet. But back at the graduation, the reality of my double life came crashing down with humiliating force. We reached the entrance to the seating area, and Frank stopped, his body blocking the path to the reserved section. He looked at me, then at the VIP lanyard around his neck, and then back at me with a grimace of awkward pity. You should probably wait in the back, Maya, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the overflow bleachers where the distant cousins and girlfriends were sitting. These seats down front, they're for veterans and serious people. You know, people who understand the protocol and the gravity of what's happening. I stood there, the cool wind whipping my hair across my face, fighting the urge to scream the truth until my throat bled. I wanted to tell him that I held a TSCI clearance, top secret, sensitive, compartmented information, with a strictly need-to-know access badge that exceeded his old clearance by 3 entire levels. I wanted to tell him that the protocol he worshipped was written by people who reported to my boss, but I couldn't. I just tightened my grip on my purse, swallowing the toxic mix of pride and rage that had become my daily diet. I had spent 5 years guiding ghosts through the valley of the shadow of death. I could handle a few hours of my father's ego, or so I thought. We stepped into the auditorium, the air conditioning hitting us like a wall of ice. Security was tighter than usual, a gauntlet of scanners and military police. That made the civilians nervous, but made me feel oddly at home. My father, however, was already unraveling. He was fumbling with his phone, his thumb aggressively mashing the screen as he tried to pull up our digital passes. The line behind us grew restless as he muttered about damn apps and back in my day completely stalling the flow of traffic. I watched him struggle for 10 seconds, seeing the man who claimed to command, authority failing at the simplest task, before I gently reached out. "Let me, Dad," I said, taking the device before he could protest. I swiped the frozen app away, corrected his settings, and scanned us in with a single motion. He snatched the phone back immediately, his pride bruising instantly. "I had it," he grumbled, refusing to look at me. But the scanner operator did. He was a young MP, sharp and alert, and his eyes locked onto the small black triangle pin on my lapel. To the public, it was jewelry, to him, it was a clearance level. He stiffened, giving me a microscopic nod of recognition. I returned it. A silent conversation between professionals happening right under my father's oblivious nose. We were moving toward our seats when my phone vibrated against my hip. 3 short pulses, 1 long. My stomach dropped. That wasn't a text, that was a code red. I slipped away to a quiet alcove near the fire exit, shielding my mouth with my hand. "Overwatch active," I whispered, my voice dropping an octave into its command register. The voice on the other end was frantic, asking for authorization on a kinetic strike package. I didn't hesitate. "Confirmed. You are clear hot for immediate engagement. Good hunting." I hung up, the adrenaline still singing in my blood, only to find Frank standing right behind me. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "You're taking work calls?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "For a logistics company? During your brother's swearing-in?" I saw the ledger in his eyes then. Every time he'd accused me of being selfish, every time he'd claimed I didn't understand duty. "This is disrespectful to the uniform, Maya." Something inside me finally snapped, not with heat but with absolute zero. "The world doesn't stop for a parade, Dad," I said, my tone matching the cold authority I used with generals. "My logistics are time-sensitive," he scoffed, shaking his head with that familiar, crushing disappointment. "Paper clips and toner cartridges can wait, Maya." He turned his back on me, straightening his tie, preparing to shake hands with the men he admired. He didn't notice the senior drill instructor walking straight toward us. The ceremony disbanded into a chaotic sea of hugs and camera flashes, but my father was on a mission. He wasn't interested in simply celebrating Caleb. He was hunting for social currency, scanning the crowd for someone of sufficient rank to validate his own past glory. He zeroed in on Senior Drill Instructor Voss, the terrifying architect of the battalion, his discipline, who was wading through the crowd like a shark moving through minnows. Frank adjusted his tie, puffed out his chest to its maximum extension, and intercepted him. "Sergeant Major Rhett Frank Miller," he announced, extending a hand as if he were granting an audience. "Great ceremony, Sergeant. Reminds me of the old breed." Voss gave him a nod that was polite but surgically dismissive, the kind of acknowledgement you give to a piece of furniture you're trying to walk around. He didn't break stride, his eyes already scanning past my father's shoulder, looking for something else. I was standing a few feet behind them, fixing the collar on Caleb's uniform. I leaned in close to my brother, dropping my voice to that low, rhythmic register I used when the comms were hot and lives were on the line. "You did good, kid," I murmured, smoothing the fabric. "Just remember, check your 6, stay frosty." The effect was instantaneous. Voss stopped dead, his boots grinding into the pavement as if he'd hit an invisible wall. His head snapped toward me, his eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and sudden intense recognition. That voice, my voice, was something he had heard screaming in his earpiece during the worst night of his life, guiding him through the smoke of Operation Sandstorm. He stepped around my father, ignoring Frank completely, and invaded my personal space with an intensity that made the surrounding families recoil. "Ma'am?" he rasped, his voice trembling slightly. Were you on comms for Task Force Black in 23? Before I could answer, Frank stepped between us, desperate to regain control of the narrative. He laughed, a nervous grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Excuse me, Sergeant," he interrupted, placing a condescending hand on Voss's arm. "You're confused. This is my daughter, Maya. She works in IT, fixes computers. You're definitely mistaken." I watched Frank's face, seeing the smug certainty there, the lifetime of assuming I was nothing more than a footnote in his biography. Voss didn't look at him. He didn't even blink. He simply barked, "Secure silence, Sergeant Major." The command cracked like a whip. Frank froze, his mouth snapping shut, his face draining of color as the hierarchy he worshipped turned against him. Voss turned his full attention back to me, searching my face for the ghost who had haunted his memories. "Call sign," he whispered, the word hanging in the air like a prayer. "Call sign Overwatch?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating the ambient noise of the parade deck. I looked at Voss, then at my father's stunned expression, and finally let the mask slip. "That's affirmative, Sergeant," I said softly. "Good to see you made it back to the States." Voss's demeanor collapsed from intimidation into absolute shaking reverence. He took a step back and snapped a crisp, slow salute. holding it for a long, agonizing 3 seconds. It wasn't a courtesy salute, it was the kind you give to a savior. "We didn't think we were making it out of that valley, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You guided us home. My boys are alive because of your voice." The soldiers nearby, hearing Task Force Black and seeing a drill instructor saluting a civilian, went dead silent, realizing instantly that I was agency or special activities. My father looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the highest-ranking person in the room. And he knew it. Voss held the salute for a moment longer than regulation required, a silent testament to the hell we had both survived, before finally dropping his hand. He stepped forward, extending a palm that felt like rough sandpaper against mine, shaking my hand with a firmness that spoke volumes. "If you need anything on this base, ma'am," he said, his voice low and serious, stripping away the drill instructor persona to reveal the soldier underneath, "you call me directly. I don't care what the protocol says. You have the run of the place." I nodded, murmuring a quiet thanks, but my attention was already shifting. The circle of silence around us was breaking. My brother, Caleb, the newly minted private, who had been the center of the universe all morning, was looking at me with wide, bewildered eyes. He didn't look jealous. He looked awestruck. He grinned, a boyish, genuine expression that reminded me why I loved him, despite the suffocating dynamic of our house. "Coolest sister ever," he whispered, pulling me into a hug that crushed the breath out of me. He didn't know the details. He didn't know about the drone strikes or the extraction protocols, but he knew I was important in a way that terrified his superiors. For the first time, he wasn't looking down at me from a pedestal, he was looking across at an equal. Then there was Frank. My father stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at Voss, then at the retreating backs of the other soldiers who were whispering my call sign, and finally at me. "Maya," he stammered, his voice losing all its usual bluster. Why didn't you say—" I cut him off before he could finish the sentence. "You never asked, Dad," I said, my voice even and devoid of the anger I expected to feel. "You only assumed." The ceremony was technically over, and the families were drifting toward the mess hall for the celebratory dinner, a tradition Frank had been talking about for weeks. He had planned to hold court there, telling war stories to Caleb's friends, while I sat silently at the end of the table. But I realized with a sudden, crystal clarity that I didn't have to sit at that table ever again. I checked my watch, a reflexive motion, though I knew exactly what time it was in the operational theater I was monitoring. "I have to go," I said. "I have to get back to the skiff." I didn't wait for permission. I turned and walked toward the parking lot, the asphalt radiating heat through the soles of my shoes. I heard footsteps hurrying behind me, heavy, desperate steps. Frank caught up to me near my sedan, breathing hard, his face flushed. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the revelation of my authority had physically shrunk him. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to find his footing, trying to find a way to make this situation fit into the world he understood. "My daughter, the spook," he said, letting out a forced, hearty laugh that sounded brittle in the open air. He tried to pivot to pride, his eyes searching mine for camaraderie. "I knew you had it in you, Maya. Deep down. I always told your mother you were sharper than you let on. It's in the blood, right? The Miller instinct." I stopped with my hand on the door handle. The audacity of it almost took my breath away. I looked at him, and the ledger in my mind flipped open, page after page of dismissals. I saw the Christmas dinner where he joked about my entry-level salary. I saw the time he told my cousins I was finding myself while I was actually coordinating a hostage rescue. I saw the look of disappointment he gave me every time I didn't wear a uniform. "Don't," I said. The word was soft, but it hit him like a physical blow. "Don't rewrite history, Dad." "Maya, I'm just saying." "You called me useless this morning," I interrupted, locking eyes with him. "You told a stranger to ignore me because I was just a civilian. You don't get to claim credit for a career you spent 10 years mocking." I opened the car door, tossing my bag onto the passenger seat. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this for your legacy, or to be the son you wanted. I do it for the job. I do it for the people who actually know who I am." I got in and started the engine. As I drove toward the gate, leaving him standing alone in the vast empty parking, Lot. I watched him in the rearview mirror until he was just a small, blurry figure. When I reached the checkpoint, the young MP who had scanned me earlier saw my car approaching. He didn't ask for my ID this time. He stepped out of the booth, straightened his back, and snapped a sharp salute. I didn't return it, I wasn't military, but I nodded. It was enough. 1 year later, my office was quiet, the only sound the hum of the secure servers and the distant chatter of the analysts outside my glass walls. The plaque on my desk read Section Chief M. Miller, a title that came with a pay grade my father couldn't even guess at. I was reviewing a situational report from the Horn of Africa when my personal phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Frank. Saw a news clip about the region. Looks bad. Be safe. I stared at the screen for a long moment. A year ago, a text like that would have sent me spiraling, analyzing his tone, desperate for the crumb of affection it represented. I would have called him, explained the geopolitics, tried to impress him. But now, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, just a cool professional distance. The need for his validation had died the moment Voss saluted me. I realized then that my true family weren't the people who shared my DNA and belittled my existence. My family were the people in this building, the ones who trusted me with their lives when the world went dark. I typed a single word in reply, always. Then I locked the phone, placed it face down, and went back to work. My father spent 20 years demanding respect for his uniform. It took me 30 seconds to earn it without wearing one. If you've ever been the black sheep who was secretly outperforming everyone in the room, let me know in the comments. Silence is power. Tell me your story.